This year, 2025, it is 100 years ago that composer-conductor PIERRE BOULEZ was born. Dutch conductor Ed Spanjaard not only knew PIERRE BOULEZ very well personally, but also spread over at least 4 decenniums, conducted a lot of compositions by the enigmatic French composer. So, for commemorating Boulez's 100th birthday, interviewing Ed Spanjaard is one of the best ways to do that. Ed Spanjaard studied in Amsterdam and London. He was assistant of Bernard Haitink, Georg Solti and Herbert von Karajan, staff member of the opera in Glyndebourne and the Royal Opera Covent Garden in London. Since 1982 he is the conductor of the Dutch Nieuw Ensemble, ensemble of contemporary music. He also worked regularly with the Royal Concertgebouworkest in Holland, the Münchner Philharmoniker, Danish National Symphonic Orchestra, the Opera of Lyon, Ensemble Intercontemporain in Paris, Ensemble Modern in Frankfurt, and Klankforum Wien. Since September 2012, Ed Spanjaard teaches conducting orchestras at the Conservatory in Amsterdam. I interviewed Ed Spanjaard in his apartment in Amsterdam. Do you remember when the first time you heard about PIERRE BOULEZ or heard his music for the first time?
Strangely enough, my mother, who was a good flautist, but she couldn't finish the study because of the war, spoke very enthusiastically about Plis selon Plis. That must have been in the middle 60s or so. I don't know exactly where she heard it, probably in Amsterdam. We lived in Haarlem. And the first time I saw Boulez was in '67 with the Concertgebouw Orchestra. And from the high school in Haarlem, with 2 friends that were music enthusiasts, we went to the Concertgebouw, where he conducted Le Martyre de Saint-Sébastien, Debussy. And I knew the orchestral fragments because when I went to high school, I got a bigger room in our house. And there were the 78 recordings that my father had collected before the war. You know, the fast ones. And there were 4 symphonic fragments of this mysterious and fascinating score, which is quite a late Debussy. So we went there. There were some beautiful Dutch singers. I remember Erna Sporenberg, beautiful soprano. And it was wonderful. Dozens of years later, because I got to know Boulez quite well later on, and I was often in Paris, and he participated in a film that was made of Eclat with my ensemble, and where he coached the pianist, and we talked. And one of the last times I spoke, and we talked about Le Martyre de Saint-Sébastien, and he said, I love the music, but I don't like the text at all. It is a rather swollen text by Gabriele D'Annunzio. Also, there's much more text than music. But partly with this in mind, when I took leave of my chefship of the Limburg Orchestra in Maastricht, I did a production of Le Martyre de Saint-Sébastien with a new text from one of our most brilliant writers and performers, that was Ramzi Nasser, and with new dance made by Tour van Schaik, who is a fantastic choreographer. We had very simple sets, but it was a theatrical thing, and I was very proud to be able to do that. That was only, when was it, 2012, a few years before Boulez passed away?
2016.
2016. But later, then when I started to live in London, that was in 72, first I studied conducting at the Guildhall School, then I became a repetiteur at Covent Garden. And Boulez was the chief conductor of the BBC. And they rehearsed in Maida Vale. And I went there. In those days, it was quite easy. Rehearsals of great masters were accessible. Now you need a magnetic card, you need a written permit, and you're not allowed in the first rehearsal. So I remember him rehearsing L'après-midi d'un faune and Sacre du Printemps, really core pieces of his repertoire. Then I saw him conducting Pelléas et Mélisande at Covent Garden. And then, actually, I've seen him a lot. Nearly always when he came to Holland, I saw him. Sometimes he came to the Saturday matinee with Ensemble Intercontemporain. In the 90s, I conducted l'Ensemble Intercontemporain various times. And he always came to the concerts. Very sweet of him. And whenever I did a piece of his, I think I conducted 9 of his scores. Usually, I made a date with his secretary, traveled to Paris, and he always made time for me. The first time when I conducted Eclat multiple, big, Eclat is not so long. It's one of my most loved pieces. I've done that actually a few months ago. I did it in Antwerp, commemorate the 100 years birth, and it is a fantastic piece. Every musician has to have perfect sight lines with the conductor, because you literally partly recreate the score when you go along. The order of certain things, the dynamics, the timing can vary, and yet each sound is so typically Boulezian. And what he uses to marvelous degree, that all the plucked instruments, harp, mandolin, cimbalom, piano, are unable to sustain a note, unlike a clarinet or a violin. So often he, for instance, does a trill with 9 instruments, then I cut them off, they let it resonate, and in the resonance, the color and the thickness of what remains changes all the time. And that's a wonderful happening. So actually my score of Eclat, he with pencil wrote some things, but what was even nicer, Multiple is a very complex piece, because you need 6 extra violas. And when we did it, this was around 87, I'm not 100% sure the year. I went to Düsseldorf because there was a very high-class viola school at the conservatory. And the day before the concert, we went to have an Indonesian meal, which is especially good in Holland, with all the extra musicians from Düsseldorf. And that day, on the doormat, came a big paper of Boulez. Cher monsieur, I wish you a great performance. I changed some notes at the end of Multiple, and I have it. He gave me new extra notes. So nice. And unlike, what is strange, yes, I jump the years a little bit, but
it's okay.
I think in 2001 there was the Muziekmonat Basel. And they had built a special hall with a pretty good acoustic and about 1,200 seats just for that festival of a month. And Boulez gave some important performances, and I was performing, I think it was with Klangforum Wien. And after Boulez's last performance, he needed to have a flight to America. I think it was Cleveland, maybe it was Chicago. And the police came to his hotel and said, "You're not able to go to the airport because we've read in an interview of 20 years before that we should blow up all the opera houses. And he missed his flight.
He missed his flight then.
Yes. But, okay, Bayreuth. I was very often in Bayreuth. Okay. And I was there for the first time in 1977 I was invited by a close friend from Covent Garden because I was still working at Covent Garden. And that friend was working for Colin Davis, Tannhäuser, and did some stage duties in the famous Boulez ring with Patrice Chéreau.
Yeah, 76.
76, through to 80. And my first really working year was 79. I was the assistant to Dutch conductor Edu de Waard for a new production of Lohengrin, which was intense because then you rehearse 6 or 7 weeks. Mm-hmm. And he also did stage duties. That sort of thing. In Rheingold I had to give light to the Siegfried horn somewhere, I don't know where. And I saw a lot of Boulez rehearsals. And what is funny, Bayreuth has a pit which is extremely deep, the Graben, where the orchestra sits. A fascinating seating, for instance, there are 16 first and 16 second violins. And for instance, the double basses, there are 4 down there at that side and 4 down there at that side. And when Boulez started in 76, he changed quite a bit. He had one of the very best ears that any conductor had. And because the pit in Bayreuth is quite a lot covered, the sound that comes out is a little muffled in a way. Therefore the musicians play very loud. The brass plays very loud. And the intonation is sometimes not so good. And Boulez was very precise with it. And Boulez, as we know, is not overindulgent. He doesn't like sentimentality, so he put some things straight. And the first years, when you went on the Hügel, you know that Bayreuth's house is on a hill, you got printed leaflets. Don't go to this performance of the ring. It is how do you say that? It is falsch. It is nicht authentisch. It is a travesty. But slowly, every year, there were more people that warmed to Boulez, and I attended the last performance of Götterdämmerung in 80, and the applause didn't stop. And what is interesting, that the Graben in Bayreuth is very deep. That is not the place where the orchestra alone rehearses, because it's very strange, deep seating. So they sit on the floor of the restaurant. That's the only bigger flat space, but there's no conductor's room. They just put all the tables and the chairs to the side. Mm-hmm. And what's funny, I wear this red shirt for the first time in years, and I remember that Boulez often had a kooltrui. How do you call that? I don't know. A sweater, dark red. So maybe this is a little bit Boulezian.
Yeah, okay.
And he was Ruhe bitte. I remember he needed to say that quite often. He never shouted. He was always polite. He was, had a very clear beat, never with a baton. And he is not a tyrant. So probably for some German musicians, it was slightly unusual. Actually, I later than Bayreuth, I heard him watched his rehearsals with the 2 orchestras in Berlin. I remember a rehearsal with the Berliner Philharmoniker, where he did Ravel, Rhapsodie Espagnole, very good, although it's not a Ravel piece that he was particularly fond of. He found it a little too set pieces. With pieces like Daphnis and Scheherazade, you can make more, you find your own path in it. Mm-hmm. And when you have started a tempo in Rhapsodie Espagnole, it's more or less there. That is a very interesting thing that I learned from watching and looking. One of the other difficult pieces of Boulez I did was Le Soleil des Eaux, which is a cantata for mixed chorus, big orchestra, and solo voice. Is it one or two? I'm not even sure now. And what is interesting, that he made and recorded different versions. And the later in life he got, the more his tempi tended to become flexible and have more space to breathe. It's quite interesting. Mm-hmm. So the young man who can be rigid, yes, mellowed. Another thing, once I had to copy Boulez completely. There's a very fine recording of Prélude à la Pyramide d'un Faune, I think with the New Philharmonia Orchestra. Probably made in the 70s. And in 1978, the Dutch National Ballet, where I, in that time, conducted quite a lot, made a new ballet on Prélude à la Pyramide d'un Faune, with two prima ballerinas of the Dutch National Ballet. One was Alexandra Radius, our most famous dancer, and no one less than Rudolf Nureyev. So it was a pas de trois. And the choreographer, Tour van Schaik, had made it on the Boulez recording, which was very good, but if the flute plays da 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 dee da dee dee do dee, there can be rubato, and sometimes they needed to make a pirouette or to do something on a very fast note, and it's never. I told it to Boulez. He said it's not nice if you get somebody else's jacket. Huh? And what did I do? There's a very good piano reduction of L'Après-midi d'un Faune, which sounds good, and you can play it with two hands. It's not easy, but it works. And I took it later, a couple of days before the orchestra came there, to the ballet rehearsals, so that I could play it. And of course the choreographer was there and all the dancers, and I said, the performance is wonderful, but Boulez, but there are 3 or 4 things where I would like a slightly different rubato. He said, okay. And I played it, and it was okay. And do you know who came to the premiere of that performance? It was it was a matinee on the 1st of March 78, and Lenny Bernstein was in the audience. Because he was guest conducting in the Concertgebouw, and for 2 seasons I was appointed the assistant to Bernard Haitink, who I knew from Covent Garden and also a little bit before. He had asked me, will you come to the Concertgebouw? And Bernstein came. He hadn't been to the Concertgebouw for quite a long time, I think something like 15 years. And so I worked with him. I played rehearsals of the Beethoven Missa Solemnis, and he came to the ballet performance. But the time that, and each time that Boulez was in Amsterdam, he was here fortunately quite often. Mm-hmm. I would say that every 2 or 3 years he came with Ensemble Intercontemporain. He conducted in 95 a new production of Moses und Aaron. And I must tell you a painful anecdote. He had worked with my ensemble, the Nieuw Ensemble, because he had conducted a performance of Die Rive 1 for the program of Han Reiziger on Sunday morning. And our percussion player, Herman Halewijn, was a first-class cook. And Boulez had a performance, a matinee of Moses and Aaron, and afterwards he would come to have dinner in my house with my ensemble present, about 9 people, and Herman, the percussion, came the day before with his own milk, his own sugar, his own eggs, his own shrimps, his own vegetables to start cooking. And then I came home from rehearsal on Sunday morning, and it was the fax time. There was still fax. We didn't have internet. Mm-hmm. And there was a fax of the organization of the National Opera, and it said, Mr. Boulez is very sorry, but he's ill. He has to go to bed straight after the performance of Schoenberg. It's almost like a bad joke. And I walked to my kitchen. I said to Herman, listen. And he said, you're making a joke, are you? I said, no, I don't. And then later we phoned, can we bring some food? Because it was excellent. He was staying in a place in the Prinsengracht, bicycle distance. No, he wants silence. He had a severe prostate problem at the time.
Then already?
Yeah, that was in 95. So he never... And the one thing that we knew, he didn't want garlic, which is very strange for a Frenchman. But anyway, this was middle 90s and early 90s. A wonderful filmmaker, a Dutch filmmaker, Frank Scheffer, who has made excellent movies on contemporary music, made a film on Eclat by Boulez. And he made it very good. It was not only musically filmed well, the rehearsals were there, the whole performance uninterrupted. And there were images, because Eclat means also flash, and like also when you break glass, then and images like that were in the movie. And we went to Paris, the film team, to talk to Boulez. Yes. He was coaching our pianist. We had a long discussion, he and myself, in his office.
In Eerkamp?
In Eerkamp. And for the film, you know, outside of Eerkamp is this lovely fountain with Niki de Saint-Val, you know, with things turning. In my memory, Boulez and I, for the film, walked 40 minutes round the fountain to have a pretty picture. The film must be somewhere, but not 1 second made the final result. There's one memory that I have that I will never forget. The interview with him in his office on the 4th or 5th floor was late afternoon, something like 5 o'clock. And that same evening he needed to go to a concert that his friend Luciano Berio was conducting in Paris. So the time was a little bit restricted. But like, to me he's always been so friendly and warm and easy to approach and elegant. And the filmmaker asked him, one of the questions was, can you tell us one of your inspirations outside of music, to when you compose? And he started to talk an interesting thing about architecture. Certain architects, certain buildings, a way of looking at things. And then the camera person said, I'm sorry, the roll is finished a couple of minutes ago. And I was there, I didn't have a function, I was just watching. And I thought, ooh. And Boulez was totally calm. So there was a new film in the camera. And Scheffer asked the question, can you talk about something that inspired you in your music? Yes, of course. And he gave a totally different answer. He talked about Paul Klee. Yeah. The famous painter, and what I remember, and what is very interesting, and I can imagine that in Klee, the foreground and the background both have a great importance. Yeah. And that's also, I can really imagine that for Boulez that was a core thing. That you don't have just a melody and then you have boom, pa, pa, po, pi, pi, po, po, po. That's not typically Boulez. So but the fact that in total calm and civil and friendly, he answered the question. But
the skyscraper is in the documentary.
Ah, yes, it is.
Also with Klee. Okay. So both of these.
Yeah. Maybe there was even a third thing. But anyway, there was a broken off answer. And when the film needed to be retaken, he changed the answer. So I saw a lot of the Ring rehearsals. Later, as I think I mentioned, I saw him doing Ravel with the Berliner Philharmoniker, and a couple of years later I saw him rehearsing Barenboim's orchestra in Berlin, where he did, I think it was Le Soleil des Eaux. And I remember, so that by that time he was 80 or almost 80. And even then, you know, there's quite a lot of percussion, like wood block or something like that. And he was rehearsing very, very good. And then some people in the orchestra would do, you know, that you think that a child does it in a student orchestra for a second-rate conductor, even Boulez. But then after that, yeah, he with the Concertgebouw, Pierre Boulez belonged to, I would say, about 5 or 6 conductors. I'm now, strange to say, half a century I've been a conductor myself. And I've conducted hundreds of new pieces, world premieres also, ranging from rather bad pieces of 7 minutes to masterpieces of an hour and a half, or operas. And in my way of rehearsing, I learned a lot from Boulez, a lot. His analytical understanding. And when you say analytical, people often think it's the same as dry, and that's not true. It can be dry, but it can also be really understanding what are the layers. How is a piece, for instance, a conductor that is very direct and maybe doesn't think so profoundly, when there's a fortissimo in a symphony, wow, there we go. And 3 minutes later, there's another fortissimo, wow, there we go. Now imagine that in a Tchaikovsky piece, and there are quite a lot of fortissimos, but for instance in those masterful symphonies 4, 5 and 6 of Tchaikovsky, if you do a long movement, suppose that each fortissimo would be exactly the same decibels, it's not right. But even, especially in Beethoven. Beethoven writes often forte, più forte, fortissimo. And many of us conductors, because Beethoven has such drive and impatience and sometimes anger, that if you're not careful, that every forte is boom, right in your face. Then comes the più forte, there's no more più forte. And that is part of an analytical mind, to know how to structure, but it also applies to tempo and underlying relation. For instance, if a theme is repeated, like in a classical or romantic symphony often, it can be exactly the same, but it can be 7 bars longer, it can be more irregular, it can be in the wrong key, in brackets, and that has a meaning. And you need to think about it. But practically, what Boulez, his ear was amazing. So if there are 6 horns in a Webern piece or Schoenberg piece, he knows the 4th horn is a little too flat on the 3rd chord. He hears that. And there are a few other conductors that hear that, but not many. And also he never, when he corrected those things, it's never, do you see how good I am? It's just, you know, it's like saying, you know, sorry, this should be blue. Don't make it red. You know, it's practical. It's there. And what I learned particularly from him, if you have a dense score, for instance, Bartók, 4 pieces for orchestra, and you have a full orchestra, imagine the harps are very far from the double basses, usually. And the trombones are very far from the first violins. But sometimes part of the violas has the same as the bass clarinet. In the tutti, they cannot hear each other. So what does Boulez do? He said, I would like those 3 bars, second half of the violas, the bass clarinet, and the first harp. He just takes those 3 bars. First, they don't know that they are together with someone. Then it starts to grow in their bewustzijn, in their mind, conscious. Then he does it again, and then it clicks. And so when then it comes back in the total tutti, there's clarity there.
Yes.
And that is an approach that which taught me so much. And always when I watched him, and I've been lucky to watch him very often, I can enjoy that and use it in my own work.
Very peculiar is that as a conductor, Boulez was autodidact.
Yeah, that's true. And I think at first he started because for domaine musical.
Yeah.
And at first they worked also for a theater group, didn't they, in the early 50s. And a lot of the performing of new music was so cut and dry and almost unmusical. Of course, there were some great conductors, Hans Rosbaud and Hermann Scherchen, that did wonderful things quite early on. But Boulez thought, well, let me do it. And then, he was such an intelligent man that he developed his own technique.
Mm-hmm. The first piece that he did for Domaine Musical was Le Marteau sans Maître.
Which is still a difficult piece. Yeah. Still a difficult piece. And what is funny, that of course that is a quite strictly still has serial way of composing, and 20 or 30 years after the composition there was a dissertation or a book about Le Marteau sans Maître, and it points out mistakes. So the guitar should, that bar, have a D flat and not a D natural. And Boulez looked at, said, yes, you're right. It's okay.
Can you elaborate a little bit on what these difficulties are in that piece?
Well, I would say that piece was composed at a time that he was not a very experienced conductor yet. So there are a lot of irregular changes that are not very easy. This is not so simple to explain, but for instance, we know the Sacre du Printemps, the Rite of Spring. The beat that Stravinsky wants goes almost, you could say, with the dance steps. When you conduct it, it is almost as if you make the movements that the choreographer might have wanted the dancers to do. But there are other pieces, quite often composers use this. For instance, there's Bartók. Di 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 da di da ya da di 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 da di da. Concerto for orchestra. Da di 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 da di da da di. I'm singing very out of tune, but that is also, I think it's 7/8 bar, and there you feel 1 2 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 1 2 3. The line, the cantabile wants that extension. So it feels natural to conduct it like that. But in Le Marteau and other early modern pieces, or early difficult modern masterpieces, maybe I should say that, then the conducting sometimes adds an added complex element to the performance. what is interesting in that respect, that Ligeti, one of the great composer contemporaries of Boulez, there's a masterpiece of Ligeti which I've often done, the Kammerkonzert, chamber concerto. Fascinating piece with unheard sounds, and I can almost say easy to conduct, because it is so incredibly well sought out by the composer. Also because that was, I cannot remember, I think it's late 60s written. The intelligence of Ligeti and the experience of performance, although I don't think he ever conducted himself, that's masterful. And many compositions I've conducted since, whether they are not so good, quite good, or even masterpieces, still there can be really uneasy things to conduct. And that doesn't reflect that if it's uneasy to conduct that the music is not good. Mm-hmm. But if the conducting can feel natural and quite in line with what the music says, that is wonderful. And although Eclat is very complicated to conduct, it is a great joy to do that piece. Also with the New Ensemble we've done it a lot, and I'm happy to say Boulez saw the film that Frank Scheffer made several times. Once I was 10 days in Paris and it was on different French channels 3 times. I know he really enjoyed that film, and I must say, when I think of him, it really makes me happy. Each time he always made time for me. The book that Maarten Brand wrote, I wrote a foreword that is long ago, and one of the last times I said, can you sign it? And he wrote something so touching in it. I thought, yeah, it really moves me.
When that film was made, around 92, was that also the very first time that you really met Boulez?
No, that wasn't. No, because 92, in 78, 9, in Bayreuth.
Yeah, of course. But it was the first time that he worked with you together with the New Ensemble.
Yes, that was around that time. Also, the man that got Boulez to the concert was Marius Vlothuis, who I knew quite well. And Marius, the last years of his life, there was a Pierre Boulez association. He was in it, I was in it. And Boulez knew about it, of course, and always spoke with a lot of respect about Vlothuis.
Okay. About Eclat, you said it's a very difficult piece. Has that to do with the fact that one could say that Boulez developed in the composition new manners, new ways to work for the conductor to conduct this piece?
Absolutely. For instance, there are sections where you have 4 chords, and the chords are given by Boulez. And when you hear those 4 chords, you recognize Boulez. But he says the relation of the 4 chords is not like 1, 1, 1, 1, but the relation is 1, 3, 2, 4 in any order. So it can be 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, but it could also be 1, 2, 1, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4. And how do the musicians know? They don't know. I have to be so clear that they know exactly at which moment. That's one new thing. The second new thing, he gives me 2 possibilities to do it pretty relaxed or very fast. Boom, 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 boom. So, and there's a third thing. When the conductor has the hand like this, it means you play the dynamics that goes about loud and soft that are written on top of a horizontal line, and when my hand is like this, it means we play the dynamics that stand underneath the horizontal line. So, those simple 4 chords, they don't know the tempo, they don't know the space in between, they don't know the dynamics before I make the decision at the very last moment. So it is like an eclat, it is like really, you know, that is part of it. The interrelation is so interactive, and you need very witty musicians. It's a different wittiness to play a Liszt Rhapsody or a Paganini, but it's the wittiness of flexibility of mind. And that is what makes that piece so enjoyable, and where the spirit of Boulez, who likes partly unpredictability. There's also a very nice thing that he says about Eclat. I mentioned earlier that when all the plucked instruments play a loud chord and then stop, you have just the echo of the last sound, and the color changes. And then on a moment that the conductor chooses, there's a small new entrance. And Boulez says that should feel like writing with a fountain pen on wet paper. And then, for instance, there may be a block in the score with 3 little tidum, tigadum, pobum. 3 little soft interjections on this out-sounding chord. And again, in that block, there's 3 things. But I may choose, we start with 2, then we do 2, 3, 1. Or I say we start with 1, then we do 1, 2, 3. Or I say we start with 3, 3, 1, 2. And I can time the 3. So again, everybody is on, you're really, bam, it's almost like going for the athletics. And once I conducted the piece with the Netherlands Radio Chamber Orchestra, which did a lot of modern music and was a wonderful group of players. And although I had my own score that I'd worked from and that I'd brought to Boulez, they sent me also their score, and there was something funny. A famous German new music conductor, Hans Zender, had conducted it from that score, and he had made many decisions beforehand. Not right. So he wrote in his hand, first marimba, then the glocken, then the mandolin, then the celesta. And he wrote also a sentence, slightly insulting sentence, Oscar Wilde in Bali, meaning this sensitive, rather weird personality with all these sounds, fancy sounds from faraway instruments. But anyway, I must say I'm proud that I always did it with musicians who, like myself, enjoyed the spirit of the moment.
Because that was the essence why Boulez composed it like this, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Could one say that he almost wrote this piece for the conductor, because the conductor, not exactly of course, but the conductor is the person who has to decide on what he hears at that very moment, what direction the piece goes.
Yes, he really wrote it at the time, early 60s, that he'd become a great conductor himself, and wanted to explore some liberties and some fascinating interactivity between players and conductor. Yeah, that was fantastic.
Can we talk a little bit about his music and theoretical aspects about it? Boulez called himself a dialectical composer. A composer who likes to work with opposites.
So the composition has to be a dialectical process, otherwise it isn't interesting for you, can you say?
Yes, certainly. But that's not only for me, that's also for all the, if you see all the big names of composition and the big works themselves, very important works in the history of music, they are all based on that.
I wrote down some opposites, one could say, that are more or less typical for his music, I think, and I would like you to ask to give comment on it. One of the dialectics, one could say, is the dialectic freedom versus necessity.
Yeah. Yeah, what comes to mind straight away, not so long ago I heard, what's the big piece, one of his last pieces, which with computer Réponse, yeah, that was done here about 2 months ago. Yes. It's a piece I don't know very well. I heard him conduct it in the Beurs van Berlage about 25 years ago. But what struck me, and I partly know it from Sur un Cis and Des Rives 2, moments of great virtuosity and plage, like when you're at the seaside, you know, when the landscape is flat and you can suddenly have a panorama and enjoy the silence and listen to nature. There's also a certain relation with Debussy, for whom nature was so important. I couldn't say that one-to-one, but when I heard Réponse, it struck me again. You have the virtuosity of those solo instruments grouped around the ensemble and the computer regeneration, and then moments of reflection.
But isn't that typical for maybe all his pieces?
I think it's typical for most of his pieces. Yeah, absolutely.
I thought that belonged to, I have some dialectics here, more with, for instance, the dialectic static versus dynamic. Yeah. You have a static sphere with a dynamic explosion in it.
Yeah, and what is interesting and not so easy, when it is active, it calls for virtuosity. Yeah. It's really quite difficult. Of course, with Art Contemporain, but all the orchestras, the American orchestras and the concerts where he conducted, he had very, very good players. Real virtuosity, and in Le Marteau sans Maître, the viola and the guitar, those parts belong to the most difficult parts for those instruments that exist. So you need players of a great technical skill, and at the same time, poetry and the talent to enjoy space, time, sound quality, and not only I need to do fast notes, and that is fascinating. So I would say, at least for me, the sound quality has also been something that I was always also looking for in his music. Not just swiftness of notes, but a French clarity, elegance, and sonority.
Well, for me, Jeu was very important already from the very beginning, although it was a very neglected work. It is still a neglected work. It's not very often performed. Because it is not successful. I will tell you why. Most of the conductors don't like works which are not really immediately, which make a success. Why? Because it's finished just like that. Auf Wiedersehen. That's really like telling to the audience, I don't need you anymore. You can live without me. And of course, it does not attract the kind of response of the audience that other endings, let's say, are doing. But that's an important work. Because there is an extraordinary continuity. and continuity without, you know, without there are some sections, of course, but to go from one section to another one, it's a continuous process. And also, the work on the themes and the thematic material is extraordinarily refined, and sometimes you have, you know, themes or intervals. That for me was very striking at the very beginning, and still now, that the material is done mostly with intervals, and then these intervals are expanded in time, or completely, on the contrary, condensed, and then they are sometimes barely recognizable. But you know, he used in the same time that he makes this kind of very big difference between the same thematic material, he used also a Pavlov reflex, if I may say so, because he used exactly the same pitches. So, even, you know, if you don't know the music, if you don't analyze anything, if you don't recognize the pitch by their name, but the fact that the thematic material, either genuine or terribly distorted, is exactly on the same pitch, makes you, something is the same. You don't know why exactly, you don't know what, but what I find so attractive, and for me in composition, that you must give always an element of recognition. You recognize something, and in the same time you don't know what you recognize. And that's exactly the mystery of the great works. That you have a kind of, not contradiction, I would like to say a dialectic between what is recognized, what is not recognized. If you have a work or vocabulary when you don't recognize anything, when you have no the possibility of recognizing anything at any moment, then you are lost constantly, then your interest has gone, because you don't have really a way of following. But on the, if you recognize everything at every time, very trivial, you know, thematic material, then you are not interested, because you will recognize that immediately, and your interest is not kept with the thing. But when you have a dialectic between some element which is the same and other elements which are not the same, so this kind of balance between knowledge and absence of knowledge, recognition and absence of recognition, that's for me which makes the big works. And the great works surprise you always, because even if you know them, you don't know exactly why they are so surprising. And even if you analyze that, but I mean, why, for instance, the composer chose this, why he chose that, and that's really for me the great evolution of Debussy. For instance, if you compare his early works, like the Nocturnes, for instance, with Jeux, that's of course you have the Debussy style, certainly, and there are elements of the vocabulary which are exactly the same. The language is not terribly different. I mean, it's more refined, of course, but I mean, it's not terribly different in its elements of the vocabulary. But for instance, in the Nocturnes, especially the second Nocturne, you have really, so I mean, a kind of panel, three panel, A, B, A, and you have A, the theme, B, another theme, and the third panel is the superimposition of A and B. So a kind of very classical form, and you know, this kind of panel-like type of composition was typically French, I must say, much more than Germany, because the big names in the German tradition, of course, not the small names, but I mean, the big names are really very much aware of what they call in German the Durchführung, which is a very symbolic name. So I mean, you have to go through something, Durchführung. And in the French tradition, if there is a French tradition, that's another matter I don't want to discuss. But I mean, you have certainly the kind of composition with panels. That's typical of Ravel, for instance. Ravel is mainly a composer, wonderful panels, but I mean, that's always separate. There is no, in a kind of a way, there is no progression in this sense. There is no transition. That's always, you know, a panel, a panel, a panel. If you see, you know, the decomposition, even Daphnis and Chloe is, you know, numbers. And you have that. There are combinations of themes, of course. I mean, for instance, in the small La Belle et la Bête in Ma Mère Loi, you have a wonderful combination of two themes. But I mean, you have also first the La Belle, second the Beast, and third both together. You know, and that's exactly a kind of where there is no transformation, there is no change. I think that Debussy was the only French composer, really, until me, of course. The only French composer who had this kind of feeling for the transition and the evolution of his thematic material almost beyond recognition. And that for me it was very striking from the very beginning in Jeu. And as I must say also, in the Etude. I remember I taught very little. I was teaching just in Bâle for 3 years in my life, and then I had enough. I don't like teaching, fine. But I remember I spent a lot of, because I had the analysis classes and composition classes, and the analysis classes were once, I mean, during a semester, 3 months or 4 months, on the Etude by Debussy, and also the Etude for piano are really a marvel of thematic working, because it takes the intervals as such, and therefore this Etude, you know, you see Etude on the fourth, Etude on the third, Etude on the agreements, Etude on the and so on and so forth, and then it has to be taken not only for what it is, the difficulty of playing, but you know, which is in, for instance, in the Etude of Chopin, you have Etude in third, Etude in sixth, and so on. And you know very well that, you know, you will have six, because for the hand that's very important to make parallel sixths or parallel thirds. But in Debussy that goes, of course, it takes also this problem, but it takes also the problem of working a material only with thirds, or mainly with thirds, only with fourths. And you know, fourths was against an harmonic language, and he invented a kind of harmonic language to make a thematic material with fourths. And that's really a way of thinking which was far beyond his time, and even far beyond Stravinsky, what Stravinsky was doing at this time, although Stravinsky was, you know, a genius in other districts. But in this working of the material, I think Debussy was far ahead of his time, and that was the lesson I took from him myself.
After Le Marteau, he went much and much further in loosening the grip on the technique. The technique has always stayed immaculate, but the enjoyment of sound quality, that has become much stronger. I certainly remember something. When I was studying at the Guildhall School, we did 2 improvisations sur Mallarmé, and I was the celesta player in the orchestra. And later we did it, and about 20 years ago, a singer who is now world famous, Barbara Hannigan, she was living in Amsterdam, and we knew each other because we had done a song cycle with the orchestra of a Dutch composer, and she phoned me and she said, I have the opportunity to do it with Boulez in Paris, but I don't know if I know it well enough. Can I come along? And she came. My music room is just above here. And that first time she was already immaculate. So I didn't need to do anything, but just I think it made her just relax. That, of course, she was very, very good. But it was nice. Yes. Yeah.
Another dialectic, and the only question I have asked Boulez once, and it was in 1995, 30 years ago this year, was about order and disorder.
In the Mozes and Aaronkerk, Mr. Boulez, you said that the older you get, the more you long for disorder. The more you long for disorder.
Disorder.
But in the past you also said that as far as music is concerned, you're 300% a Leninist. How do you compare those two?
Yes, oh yes. But I am a Leninist in a very specific way. I say, that Lenin said, communist of the Soviet, but with electricity. And I like electricity. You know, because I find that what I meant by then, that you can have the most extraordinary ideas. If you don't have the way and the means to realize them, then you remain in the domain of ideas, and that's terribly frustrating, and that does not give any results. What I say also, that I like disorder, yes. I was, maybe I am still, I guess, a rebel. I don't accept things which are established. I like to work with institutions, that's nothing to do with it. You know, I like institutions because I think institutions are absolutely necessary and vital for any kind of life. Not only the artistic life, but any kind of life. But within this institution, we have always to create disorder. Because order is death for me. When you have an excess of order, you have no more life, you have no more initiative, you have no more invention, you have no more creativity. Creativity is rebellion by itself, you know. And if you don't have rebellion, you have no creativity. And that's what I think. But I like organized disorder, if I may say so. I have my own contradictions.
But my question to you is, do you recognize that when you do these pieces of him, this order and this disorder?
Yeah, order and disorder. I would interpret it this way, that his grip on the material, whether it was his own or the composers he loved to conduct, had become so secure, so intense, and at the same time so relaxed. Mm-hmm. You would never see him conduct like this, never. Also the clarity was immaculate. He could rely on a great grip on the material, the musical material, the technical material, the instrumental way of making musicians play. So the looseness, the improvisation is maybe saying it a little bit too much, elements, he could let loose. That is what I said earlier about Le Soleil des Eaux. If you hear his different recordings, they become more laid back, more beauty of sound, more space, more breathing, more listening. What happens to the echo? How long is a... You know, that's, for instance, an interesting... You know, a fermata in music. I teach conducting at the Conservatory of Amsterdam, and suppose you have a fermata, stop, but on the last is a fermata. Unexperienced conductors will do tam boom. But maybe it is tam pim pam papadam pim pam. A fermata should nearly always mean see what is logical, has to do with the length of the music that went before, the tension that has been built up, whether you make a rallentando or not, the sound in the whole, the quality of the harmony. And so a fermata, and there are many fermatas in Boulez's music, is also a moment to reflect, to think, to enjoy, to listen. And that is, I think, what he did more and more later in his life.
Okay. About Eclat, you told already a lot of it, but there is also, if I've understood it correctly, and I don't know if this is the correct word, but a sort of mirror situation. Yeah. Can you explain that a little bit? Because I also have the idea that this is some kind of dialectic.
Yes, there is a little bit of mirror. Yes, that's true. Sometimes, yeah, there is one place, for instance, where there are 6 little entrances, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They slow down, but the notes that are played have to become faster. So it's like ting, tidam, tagadam, tigadiding, tadadadadam, taladilum. And then the next bar is the opposite. It goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So that is indeed almost as if you put a mirror between the 2 bars. It's of course a thing that Webern uses quite a lot. Yeah. Various pieces, but I believe it's in Variationen. Is it opus 30? I'm not 100% sure. But he likes to mirror. So you have ti-ding, ti-doom, po-di-ding, ti-di-doom.
But isn't it also so that the form, the envelope of Eclat is A, B, C,
Yeah, it is.
B accent, A accent?
Yeah, it is also, the biggest part is the plucked instruments, but it opens with a very marked piano solo.
Yeah.
Where the other plucked in, where the sustaining instruments do very little. The sustaining instruments don't play in the middle section, they come back at the end. Mm-hmm. So the sustaining instruments like violin, trombone, oboe cor anglais, alt oboe, they play a little bit at the beginning and quite a bit at the end. The plucked instruments are in the middle section, so that's also, it's almost like 2 holders for the central mirror, where the players and the conductor can enjoy each other's image, as it were.
In 2015 you did with the New Ensemble a special program for the 90th birthday of Boulez, and you played some chamber pieces of his. Of course Eclat, of course Le Marteau sans Maître, but also Dérive 1. Is it correct that Dérive 1 is more or less a written out, a composed improvisation?
Yes, you could say that actually. You could say that. That is funny in that piece. Basically the beat is really regular and slow. It's 40, so slower than a second. Most of it is 4 beats in a bar. If it gets very slow, you subdivide, that is what you call conducting. If it's so slow that you do 1 and 2 and 3, and because otherwise the beat is so slow that the musicians don't quite know what the rhythm in between can be. But it is true that there are and it's not easy in that piece to hold where you are, because sometimes you play 30 notes within 1 beat, where am I? And he made wisely the conducting pattern very plain, so that at least that is for the musicians a support, that you know, the downbeat is the only beat going down. So that helps them to feel secure. That is actually a piece I also did in Antwerp in the Boulez 100 year. And there was supposed to be an advanced conducting student that should have done it, but he found it too difficult with all those irregular figures to stick to his own slow tempo. And also, if you would conduct 1, 2, 3, 4, the beat may be regular, but the musicians have no idea where they are in the bar. And in that piece particularly, which is maybe the easiest Boulez piece to conduct, you need to be really helpful. But what you say is true. Those core notes need to be relaxed and regular, and all those virtuoso things in between. It has to have the same swiftness and elegance of a fish that just moves his tail, you know, and not.
But the rive de.
Yeah, that's hard.
It's very complex, I think.
It's very hard. What is funny that Sur un Cis, a late piece, that is also for a difficult piece. What is funny that with my new ensemble, we played it in Venice, something like 2001 or 2, a few months before Boulez gave his first performance in Italy of it. It's really true. I think he was in Torino and we were in Venice. Is it important? Not at all, because he had done it in Paris, but it's fun.
Yeah. Well, that's a very difficult piece, I think.
It's very difficult. Actually, last year, a very gifted student of mine, a master student from Cuba, did it in the Hague Conservatory.
Piano piece and season.
Nee, De Rive deux.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
And he didn't do the whole piece. It's a long piece. I cannot remember, 35 minutes or so. He did about 2/3 or a good half, but still very difficult. And fortunately, I could go to some rehearsals and help him, because then I do realize that it has become so familiar to me. You know, it is really, it's almost as if, how do you call when you have a puppet who speaks, you know? I'm Pierre Boulez, you know? How do you call that?
Yeah, I don't the English word, I don't know. Buikspreker.
Yeah, anyway, you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Eh? That when I saw my student, who is very gifted, rehearse that, then it was almost as if the ventriloquist. I think that's it. Wow. That I may feel that I'm a ventriloquist of the great master Boulez, and I can only think of him with gratefulness and with a big smile. And really, it sounds maybe a little bit exaggerated. Each time that I met him, he was sweet to me. He was kind, he laughed, he was helpful. It's a beautiful memory, and it taught me a great deal.
What would you say, very difficult question, I know, but what would you say is the relevance of the music of Pierre Boulez for today?
The relevance of Boulez's music, it is a voice of great musical, profound intellect. And I would say, I would combine those three qualifications. It's very musical, it's very intelligent, but it's also profound. The way he listens to the inside of sounds, harmonies, he uses elements of outer European cultures, like slightly comparable to Debussy, who used gamelan influences. Also the way, I don't know of any other composer who so profoundly influenced the relation of freedom and deep interdependence of musicians and conductor. There have been others, of course. For instance, Lutoslawski has aleatoric things. You give the pianos and the percussion there, and then you give the woodwinds there. Some of those pieces are fantastic, and that is some relation, but it's different. Also, I would say in Boulez, the doors that Debussy had opened, starting with Prélude à l'après-midi d'un faune and ending with Jeu, where there are less themes in the old sense, that you have tiatatatimpa pi tatiatatitampa ti tatiatatatam, also a very good French composer, Saint-Saëns, although I think actually I doubt if Boulez ever conducted Saint-Saëns. Some of Saint-Saëns is wonderful. Another French composer. There are other French composers I love, and I think Boulez did not. I love Poulenc. I love Dutilleux. I doubt if Boulez ever conducted them. But the way that Debussy started to loosen and mixed elements of sound and structure, and the way he looked at them and from different angles. Also, when you say Debussy is impressionistic, you think it's rather vague, but everything is so incredibly well written out. The beginning of Jeu, tambourine, taka-taka-tam, takes over the rhythm, taka-taka-tam, from the violas, paka-taka-tam. Those sort of almost hidden relations, where, like clay, it's not only a foreground and a background. There is an amalgam of listening and a way of looking profoundly inside all the musical material can do. And that is a very singular talent and genius, the way he did it. And it's incredibly satisfying to work on Boulez's music. Some of it is really hard, but you're always happy after you've done it.
But do you think that younger generations of musicians will pick this up?
Yeah, I think so. Absolutely.
So you're not very pessimistic about it?
No, I'm not pessimistic at all. And, Boulez is a great figure and a great composer, but however, there are fashions. When you have the mini skirt, it's in fashion in the year X for 2 years, and then 9 years afterwards, it's ridiculous to wear a mini skirt. I've never worn a mini skirt, for one. Can you believe that?
I do.
Okay. And then 11 years, suddenly it's top again. Now, of course, I think Boulez is too great to go such fluctuations. But for instance, in Holland, we are talking in Amsterdam, where we are now, we had, actually, Boulez did quite a lot of Dutch music, like composers Peter Schat, Jan van Vlijmen, and die belonged to what we call the Nutcrackers, the Notenkrakers. In 1970, they made Haitink having to interrupt the concert because they said, we want much more new music, we want Bruno Maderno as a regular conductor, not this old silly stuff. That was a very revolutionary and bright voice. It was also pretty aggressive. And the composers that were thought to be old-fashioned were really dumped in the waste bin. And for 50 years, that's actually quite sad. For 50 years, the dustbin composers could hardly be performed anymore. If you look at Concertgebouw programs in the 60s, you see Marius Vlothuis, Hans Henkemans, Henriette Bosmans, Oscar van Hemel, Karel Mengelberg, Willem Pijper, great teacher. They were totally out. That actually has made me sad because I knew some of those composers. And even if some of the music can be considered old-fashioned, yes, some of it can be, But it doesn't matter. What we need to look at is the music. Good or is it not good? And whether you use it, you make it in C major or you write it with 13.5 tones, and whether it is for cello solo or with an orchestra of 150 people isn't important.
But who is to determine the quality?
Yeah, the musicians, the public, the critics maybe, if they are sincere and have a broad view. But I'm not scared about Boulez at all. What I would say that there may be, for instance, I don't think Boulez had anything with minimal music. Mm-hmm. And of course minimal music, some of it is really good. John Adams wrote excellent pieces. Don't think it was Boulez's cup of tea, and some of that is much easier to digest than Réponse by Boulez, and that's okay, that's fine. But Boulez has a firm place in the high ranks of music of the last 60 years, 70 years.
But don't you think, for instance, with the attention span, the younger people from now, maybe I'm too negative, you must say it if it's so, but the attention span for a piece of Boulez, Plis L'Empire, takes more than an hour. Yeah. It's very complex music. Yeah. Will there still be an audience in 10 years for such a piece?
Yeah, I think an audience will come. I mean, there are minimal pieces that are very long. What is the famous piece by Ten Holt, for instance?
Oh yeah,
Canto Ostinato.
Yes.
I must admit I've never heard the whole piece, but that's a long piece. Yeah. And it's a very popular piece. And also popular and good composers like Arvo Pärt that write music that has a longer time span, but that it's a little bit like puts you in a half hypnosis.
Which Boulez doesn't.
No, Boulez doesn't. Boulez demands a very active way of listening. That is true. And although, for instance, what is interesting when our behavior with the television is zapping. If I look at a movie and I'm not immediately interested, after 40 seconds I zap, and then I get an interview with the Prime Minister who I don't like very much. So after 20 seconds I zap, I get a quiz. And it's a question that I cannot answer, so I'm irritated with myself and I zap on. But funnily enough, the minimal pieces or the Arvo Pärt pieces don't zap. They put you in a wave of semi-conscious enjoyment where you can, maybe, hopefully, there will be a generation where the intellectual activity wants to be spoken to. I don't worry about Boulez at all.
Okay. Well, maybe a very personal question, it's more or less at the end of this interview. Is there an absolute favorite in his oeuvre for you?
For me, it's Eclat.
Okay.
I love the sound. I love the brevity. I love the playfulness and the way that you can never predict exactly how a performance will be. Because even if you do a masterpiece like L'Histoire du Soldat, which by the way was my debut as a conductor, and it's maybe interesting to tell, when I was 10 years old, I wrote Stravinsky a letter, which my mother had to translate in English. I only knew 2 pieces. Symphonie d'Epsom, which I found rather difficult from a LP, and L'Histoire du Soldat, which I found wonderful. And I wrote him a letter, and 4 weeks later I got a postcard, and it said, with red ballpoint, to Ed Spanjaard, all the best, Igor Stravinsky, Hollywood, January 1960.
Wow.
Isn't that amazing?
You still have that car?
Of course. And now, Liefdesvrijdag is a fantastic piece. Ta-da, tiding, kang, 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 boom, boom, ching, boom, ching, boom. You feel it in your bones. Op de weg van Sas naar Sluis, een soldaat op weg naar huis. Wonderful translation of Nijhoff. By the way, that's an interesting thing. I wanted to say, if you conduct l'histoire, you know better beforehand how the performance is going to be. Because when I do it 10 times, the second time I'm not going to do Tidi, pidim, pom, pim, pim, pa, pim, pom, pim, pom, pim, pom, pi, pidi, pop, pop, pop. Impossible. But when I think of this piece, I must say it fills me with such marchful joy and resilience. That's an important thing for all of us performers. When you perform as an instrumentalist or a conductor, a piece should always partly be new. You cannot do terrible. If you do that piece well, it's incredible. And that is not always easy. Also, I know moments that you go with your orchestra. If it's a regional orchestra, you go to the hall where you know the sound is not good, and your first oboe is ill in the last moment, and there are only 37 people in the audience. That's not easy. And yet, you have to go for it full each time.
Yes. But is Eclat your favorite because as a conductor it's the most interesting thing of Boulez to do?
Yeah, but also I love the sound. And also what I really find interesting in that piece, it is timeless piece. It's totally timeless piece. I mean, there are masterpieces. For instance, when you hear Kurt Weill, I heard last month the Sieben Todsünden, fantastic. But you know the period it's written. And that's a masterpiece. Some pieces from that period, when you recognize the moment, you think, oh yeah, but we've had enough of that and there are better pieces in that style. But with Eclat, that is, it's like if you go to the very best jewelry, yes, and you write the best, a ring as beautiful as this one. Mm-hmm. That's what Eclat is.
Okay. Every entity has an appearance, one could say, and an essence. The appearance, so the physiological piece, in the case of Boulez, I would say the most, for me, peculiar thing about it is that it is always very transparent. Even if he writes for 3 pianos, 3 harps and 3 percussions in Sur and Caesar, you never have the idea, and that goes for all his pieces, I think, that one instrument group is disturbing the other. It's always very transparent. And if you talk about the essence of pieces, one could say that in Boulez it's always mystery that you're confronted with. May I ask you to react on this?
Yeah, Boulez said something which I find fascinating. Not only about his own music, but any piece. He said when you open a new score, whether it is classical or new, you're confronted with something you don't know yet. Then it becomes familiar. And finally, it's a mystery. Maybe it's not literally his word, but I know what he means. I think he wants to say that you're never quite finished in trying to fathom the message of the music and the composer. There's always room for fantasy, interpretation, and a profound thought.
Yeah. talking about that finishing it. Is that also the reason for Boulez himself that there were pieces in his oeuvre that he didn't finish, that he was always working on?
Yeah, many of his pieces were open.
Yeah.
Like I mentioned the multiple, I have this.
For instance.
Yeah.
About that piece, Eclat multiple, he said in 2010 that he still wanted to elaborate on that.
Yeah, it's interesting, that.
And for Die Rive, he said, I have a Drive 3 in my head.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it is maybe also the image that I get now, you know, a mobile, that you have 7 birds floating as the wind, you know, and it's something like, for instance, this happens to be my name. But if I show you this and I ask you, what do you see? You will see, I see your name. I said, no, it's BB.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.